Welcome to the Ryerson Negotiation Project. My guest today is Martin Singh, entrepreneur, professional, and a man with a passion for public policy. Welcome to the show, Martin.
It's a pleasure to be here, David.
Martin has a bachelor's degree in science, one in pharmacy, engineering, and a master's degree in business administration. He is also a partner and a director of Precision Health Group. They operate 6 pharmacies and have 7 care facilities with over 300 employees. Mr. Singh was also a leadership candidate for the federal New Democratic Party. He supported on the second ballot Mr. Mulcair, who is today the leader of the official opposition. Martin, tell us, why the NDP, why the leadership, why Mr. Mulcair?
Well, I'll tell you, the story starts some years back, and my interest in politics began when I was very, very young, and I would also say it was in my family. My father ran for the Liberal Party, actually, provincially in Nova Scotia back
A great man. A great man.
And no doubt that you would think so. And so he ran, albeit unsuccessfully at that time, in the constituency of the Eastern Shore in 1988, and that piqued my interest. And so I continued following in politics, but then as I just, through my own investigations and whatnot in the 1990s, found that my home lay elsewhere. And that process took me through an investigation of Tommy Douglas, the history of the CCF and whatnot. And so, I mean, if I understand where you might be going with your question, how does a business person find themselves in the NDP? Because there's a lot of folks who believe that, those two realities may be incongruent. I don't see them as such, but some others may. And so what I found was that through my study of the history of New Democratic Party governments, that they're in fact had the best fiscal record of any in Canada on the provincial level. And so I said, this really is my home. I have folks here who take, finances and business seriously, but also have the social progressive values that I, hold in my heart.
Martin, you've said to me both privately as well as other individuals that relationships, whether it be in the political sphere of the world, but particularly in business, are very, very important. Would you care to comment on the significance of relationships and how they've shaped you as an individual, an entrepreneur and a professional?
Certainly. Relationships are very, very important because trust is essential. And what I mean by that, you can be presented with any number of good deals and whatnot come across your desk. But if you do not trust the person on the other side or trust other people who are around you recommending the deal and whatnot, you're not going to want to find yourself going forward with it. And so you have to ensure that you spend, a good amount of time establishing solid relationships with those people around you so that the trust exists and is pre-existing before going into negotiation for anything, whether it be, that's true of business, family, politics and otherwise, really.
Any examples come to mind where you've embarked upon a particular initiative because of the relationship, or where you didn't proceed because the relationship wasn't what you thought it should be?
I would say that, we could say that perhaps the very beginning of my stepping into the NDP leadership race was as a result of me having a solid relationship with people. What happened there, David, was that there were a number of folks who came to me from across the country and they said, Martin, you've been in the NDP for some years. You have a solid business background. You also have, what they consider to be solid, social progressive values through advocating of a pharmacare program and whatnot. And they said, we would like you to run and to bring those to the fore, as it were. And I said back to them, I said, okay, I will give this some consideration, but it's important that you guys also develop a vested interest in this by coming and being a part of the team. And so if the relationship was not pre-existing there, if the trust did not exist there, David, then that whole thing would not have been able to go forward. Like there would have been really too much risk involved in stepping into that, because it's not a small thing running for the leadership of a federal party.
It certainly is. It certainly isn't for a national political party. So you had pretty strong relationships that you had developed over the years. Any examples where relationships were not what you wanted them to be and you did not proceed? Say, for instance, in some of your business initiatives.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to disparage anybody or anything.
We don't need personal names or
anything like that. But what I will say is that, my company has some focus on acquisition. And as a result of that, you will be presented with any number of different deals. And so whether it's the person doing the presenting, the person, because it changes on occasion, who's doing the financing, or the person on the other side who's actually wanting to sell their business property, whatever the case may be, the trust and the relationship has to exist really with each and every one of these. And that's not to say that the relationship has to be long-standing with each and every one of these individuals, because of course you will meet people like as an acquaintance that you'll end up doing business with, but they have to comport themselves in a manner, and you are also responsible for comporting yourself in a manner that shows that you are professional, have respect for what they're offering, and understand what you're actually looking for very, very well.
You have been described by many individuals, including your detractors, as a person who has great listening skills. If that is true, how have you practiced that? How have you developed that high quality, which is so essential to be a good negotiator?
By not getting it right early on.
Explain.
Well, there have been occasions in my life, in my youth, where I've had opportunity to look back, and on reflection, I could say that, I didn't get my desired outcome there, and had I listened more closely to what one or more people had mentioned to me, not necessarily in one occasion, but perhaps on a few occasions, then the outcome would have gone, or at least would have had a greater chance of going in my favor. And I like to think of myself as a fast learner, but I will say that whole process of becoming a good listener actually did not come quickly for me. It was something that got developed over a number of years. And yeah, it is as a result of, how shall I say, failure, but not failure in a bad way, failure in that produces growth and positive change, that has now resulted in me, hopefully, being a good listener.
So how has that changed you today? Would you say that you now use your listening skills to your advantage?
I would say that my listening skills are used to really learn what the hopes and fears are of those who are sitting across the negotiation table from me. Because I should also say this, is that I like to think of myself as a sympathetic person and a compassionate person. And so I'm interested in having any deal done really be a win-win. Meaning that I come away happy as either a buyer or seller, depending on the situation, and the person or group of people on the other end also leave the table feeling that they've gotten what they've wanted. And in order to really do that effectively, you have to pay very close attention to the deal in its entirety. And what I mean by that, it's not just the deal as it's written out on paper, meaning that, you will get this upon the purchase of X, Y, Z or whatnot, but it's what people want to see happen there. I'll give you an example. There was an occasion where we were looking at purchasing a pharmacy, and the whole first 2 hours of the discussion with the potential seller didn't focus on the purchase price or any of the assets at all. That person was very, very concerned with, whether or not we were going to retain the employees, what our philosophy was in terms of the practice of pharmacy, what our approach was, in terms of the clinical services that would be offered to the clients. Part of this was certainly to maintain what that person's baby was, in essence, because they had started that business themselves and had grown it, and they were very concerned about that. But also, too, their fear was that, in fact, there was a very much how shall I say, a strong personal relationship that exists between the owner and the employees, even though the owner was leaving the picture, and they wanted to make sure that that was maintained. And so, had we not listened to that, and perhaps only focused on what was on the paper in the contract, then perhaps that deal may not have gone the way it had.
Difficult people. Have you ever encountered them in your
Sure.
day-to-day activities?
Sure.
How have you dealt with them? What would you recommend to a viewing audience, a young person, in terms of trying to deal with difficult people?
Listen even more closely. What you have to do, you have to tease out, where that difficulty lies. What is the concern that's producing the roadblock? Part of that is listening in the spot. Also, too, it's doing the best you can in learning the background, meaning background of the person or people with whom you're negotiating. Also, learning what obstacles their history and your history might cause to happen in the negotiation, the actual negotiation session, and then bring all of those items together. So do your homework, listen closely, and try to be a sympathetic ear. And that just doesn't mean listening well, but it also means trying to put yourself in the shoes of those on the other side of the table from you. And I will say, frankly, it doesn't always work, but I would argue that you certainly have a greater chance of meeting with success.
Share with us the kinds of preparation that you would have had to conduct in terms of proceeding with that kind of an operation. I think all too often people think, well, you get an idea on Friday afternoon and you think about it on the weekend, and then on Monday you go to the bank and get your money and you proceed. What kind of preparation did you have to do to get this thing up and running?
So what we did is that we realized, that it's important that we are not all experts in everything. And so one of our partners is a business broker, and so they do a lot of that particular analysis. I'm interested in the healthcare aspect primarily. Like, I still get involved with the deal and the business and whatnot to pass judgment on it and look at the numbers, but I don't, as part of my work, dig down into the minutiae of that. That's really somebody else's job, and there would be too much work really to get involved in that in order to make deals happen efficiently, I guess. And then the other folks check things out, like other characteristics, for example. Characteristics that are not necessarily financial at all. We're very interested in making sure that there's long-standing management in any of the places that we buy, and because we believe it's an indicator of a healthy business. And so there's kind of a checklist that we go through, and that checklist is parceled out to the people that all have expertise in their particular area, and they do their background work. And then
sort of like doing your due diligence.
Well, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And there's due diligence that we talk about. Due diligence, like in terms of buying land, make sure that you do your environmental scan and whatnot, and different things such as that. But then there's another thing that I would term due diligence, even though I guess it's not officially termed due diligence. And then we come together and we say, okay, does it make sense on your end? Does it make sense on my end? Like, we cycle it through the partners. What are your concerns? What do you think the risks are involved? And then after that, then we see, okay, the deal makes sense to us from a business perspective. Can we get financing for it? Because as much as we might see a deal that's good for us, those people who finance us might not see it as a deal that fits within, how they circumscribe or what their funding partners, I should say, circumscribe the type of businesses that they want to fund.
What would be the shortest period of time that you could do a deal, and what would be the longest period of time? Would it be 2 months, 6 months? How would it work in some of the acquisitions that you've
Yeah,
made?
it really varies, David. Like I really can't put a finger on it, because there have been times when we've purchased something from a mom and pop type business, and for a whole bunch of different reasons, it took a longer period of time, and none of them being errors or fault on either side. It took a bit longer, and then there's other times when we've bought facilities and whatnot from corporate partners, and it's a very different environment, and it proceeds much more differently. In addition, those people who finance you look at it differently as well. And so I would say that probably the fastest turnaround for us maybe has been 7 months, 6 or 7 months, something like that. And then the longest out, I mean, I'm speculating a bit on this because I don't necessarily remember the exact date that you would say negotiations began, but it could have been a year or even 13 months. Because also what will happen, you'll have people who want to sell and then decide that they don't.
Change their mind.
And then they come back and then they really decide that they do, right? And so that of course stretches it out that much longer.
The reason why I ask you that question, I'm thinking, for instance, of the second or third year university student who's doing a commerce degree at the Ted Rogers School of Management, or working in the radio television sector here at Ryerson University, that these kinds of engagements just don't happen overnight. There's a fair degree of time allocation, preparation time, strategic analysis. Am I right on that?
That's exactly right. But I mean, and we're talking about the deals I go through. I mean, there's a similar amount of prep work and analysis and negotiation that happens for the 9 out of 10 deals that don't happen, for example. And so it's hugely important. And you really do yourself no good service if you underestimate the value of preparation.
Tell us about impasse. Have you ever encountered either a negotiations or a situation where you were attempting to achieve something and an impasse has arisen?
Yes, like it's and it's happened on more than one occasion. For us, if I remember correctly, the impasse just comes around in the few times that it's happened, where both sides kind of wanted a deal to happen, but it wasn't going anywhere. It was focused on the value of the business, meaning the way we valued the business was being done differently than the way they were being valued the business.
Was that just a mathematical calculation, or was there a human factor calculation?
I would argue that it was in fact both, meaning that there was a price per unit that we felt things were valued at, which was felt differently by the other party, and then there's also, of course, you pay so much for goodwill and whatnot, and that was different in terms of how we viewed it and the other party viewed it.
So what's been your experience in terms of dealing with that kind of an impasse? How would you react, or what would you do, or what would you do differently if that impasse were to arise again in a subsequent acquisition?
Yeah, well, even before we get to the subsequent acquisition, let's talk about what we do when we're in the one where we're actually experiencing the impasse. It goes back to what I said earlier, whereby we try to be sympathetic with the person on the other side. We try to place ourselves into their shoes. Why is it are they valuing it differently? Because on our side, we see ourselves as, 4 intelligent human beings that have some experience in what we're doing. And so we're coming up with a number that we feel is logical. But the person on the other side is similarly well-versed in their business, has gone through a similar evaluation process, yet they have come up with, a very different number. How does this happen? And so that's where we try to, through discussion, learn how it is that they came to their number. And you don't always learn that, I mean, sometimes they keep the method through which they evaluate their business close to their chest, and that's fine, that's their business. But that's really what we try to do. And then there are learnings that will come from that are sometimes, applicable to further discussions and further negotiations, and sometimes not, because part of it's also individual as well.
So in terms of these impasses, have you had occasions where you've determined, well, there is an impasse, we're going to have to walk away?
Oh, certainly. And I would argue that happens more often than not when these things come together. Although, what you'll sometimes see is that there will be new learning happen on either one side or the other over time, and that's where you get the situation that I mentioned earlier, whereby a person is interested in selling, but then decides not, but then with time either chooses to reevaluate on their side, or we choose to reevaluate on the other side because other factors come into play, or they just simply evaluate the same factors differently, and then they come back to the table.